So, Joel, what are you expecting in the next 24 hours? Could there be a deal by October 7th, tomorrow?
Well, and I sure hope so. That would be wonderful news for all the hostage families and for the hostages to be released and to move to a ceasefire where the people in Gaza have a chance for life and for breathing again. But I won't hold my breath, quite frankly, that it will be within the next day or two that we'll have a full signed agreement. And that's really the key component here, is that there needs to be a signed deal where both sides agree to the same piece of paper. Up till now, it's all been oral. We've heard about signatures, but really there's no clarity about what has been agreed to on paper. I hope that it will happen. I would not want them to rush for 1 day versus 2 or 3 if they can get a signed agreement that both are on board with, though.
Yeah, Netanyahu is saying that all the remaining hostages, 20 of whom are believed to be alive, could be released this week. And that, of course, is the biggest piece of this deal, particularly for Israel and for the Trump administration. But I have to wonder, what is Hamas going to demand in exchange?
Well, that is where the tricky part of the negotiation comes in. You're right. The first milestone is getting the hostages out. That sets the good faith baseline. But for Hamas, then, if they release all the hostages, they've always been holding onto that with the hopes of getting more concessions. And what they want is to stay in power. What they want is to maintain some type of military infrastructure and some political future. And that just can't happen. For Israeli security and for investment to come in from the Gulf states and elsewhere, Hamas needs to be pushed to the side. And Palestinian technocratic leaders need to come in. And that's going to be the hardest part of the negotiation table. Will our allies who have influence over Hamas, like Qatar and Turkey and Egypt, will they put the pressure on Hamas enough to agree to that and to literally end this war? Or will Hamas win, stay on, and then continue this war? That's the real big question.
Let's listen to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, heading into today's negotiations. Here's what he's saying.
90% of this has been worked out, and we're just sort of finalizing the logistical piece. We'd like to see it done yesterday. I mean, we want to see the hostages moving as quickly as possible. Who knows the timeline, but this cannot take weeks or even multiple days. We want to see this happen very fast. If it doesn't, then I think the entire deal becomes imperiled. So this has to happen quickly for the sake of the hostages, the families, and this deal.
Rubio says 90% of the deal is there, but how tough is that last 10%, the logistical piece, as he put it? Could the last 10 be a deal breaker?
Well, you know, quite frankly, Anna, that's always been the problem with Middle East diplomacy. 90% agreement, but the implementation is always the problem. That goes back decades. We had the Oslo Accords in 1993. In 1994, there was an agreement to allow for the Palestinians to have some control and autonomy in Gaza. 31 years later, we're still having that discussion. So implementation is what matters. And so I would really hope that whatever is signed is not just aspirational, high, lofty goals of what President Trump put out the other day, but real specific details about how it's going to be executed. That's always been the problem in Middle East diplomacy, and that is what is, again, going to hamstring this if it's going to actually move forward in a productive way. If they don't get that done, we won't have a productive end state.
Secretary of State for the Obama administration. He joins the chat. Welcome, Joel.
Good morning, Audie.
Okay, so Netanyahu is dealing with his own domestic politics, his own political coalition, which hinges on a more hardline stance. So what do you see in how he is trying to message this to the public, to the international community?
Well, look, if there's one thing about Prime Minister Netanyahu, is that he values his political survival over all else. And he looks at Donald Trump and he's afraid because Donald Trump is someone who can literally throw him out of office. And that is a unique position for the American president.
Why do you think that? Is it because of Trump's emphasis on the hostages, or what has endeared him to the Israeli community?
I got to tell you, he's beloved in Israel, from moving the American embassy to Jerusalem to allowing Israel to annex the Golan Heights to bombing Iran. The list goes on and on. And Netanyahu knows this, that if Trump starts denouncing Netanyahu, and he's a wild card, what if he says, I'm going to cut aid, I'm going to stop sending you the weapons? That would get Bibi thrown out. And so for Netanyahu, he's playing for time. This deal does, if it works, if it goes forward, have the chance to get the hostages out, get aid into Gaza, move towards a ceasefire. But it's not much of a deal. I got to tell you, it's more of an announcement and a set of promises and some kind of framework that potentially could possibly have something.
But it's not nothing. President Trump told Jake Tapper yesterday in a series of text messages, we're going to show you some of those, that Hamas faces, quote, complete obliteration if it refuses to give up power in Gaza. I think most agreements have talked about the idea of there is no Hamas ruling Gaza after this scenario. Can you talk about Hamas itself? Like, how does this happen? How do you bring such a group to the table?
First of all, I got to say that that's ridiculous. Look, this has been a hot war for 2 years, but it's a 40-year war with Hamas going back a multi-decades. And you have Hamas in the West Bank fighting a low-boil war with the Israelis and the settlers over there. So the idea that Hamas is done, while I would wish it be so, that is not in the cards in this, and that is what they're going to have to negotiate. Now, what are the modalities? Hamas could potentially be pushed out if, for example, in the reconstruction process, the Arab nations want to put money in to rebuild it and get new Palestinian leaders. But that is not clear as to being part of this deal. Nobody signed the paper in public yet. So that's what I'm looking for. Will the Israelis and the Hamas leaders sign the same piece of paper and agree to the same details? Then we have a deal.
For legislative affairs under the Obama administration. Gents, thank you both for being here. I want to start with you, Joel. Is Hamas, in a sense, playing President Trump, or at least trying to? And I say that because I have never seen Hamas praise an American president of either party.
No doubt. Look, Leland, I am cautiously hopeful yet deeply skeptical at the same time. And I think
I need a whiteboard to figure out what that means.
It's a lot of words. It basically means I really hope this works, but there are a lot of unknowns. And Hamas, of course, sees an opportunity to get the upper hand in the public negotiations. But at the end of the day, what they did agree to was the sequencing aligned with the 21-point plan that starts with releasing all the hostages. So there's going to be a lot of debate about what it means, what it doesn't mean, long-term, near-term. But the proof will be in the decision of Hamas to get the people out. And if they are let go and sent back to Israel, that will be a sign.
Right. Look, if it starts with hostages being released, the hostages, that's huge.
Yes.
President Trump has been very direct in his words over and over. They have 72 hours, so that would have put us around Sunday night, or all hell is going to break loose. Take a listen.
If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. If all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. We have one signature that we need, and that signature will pay in hell if they don't sign.
All right, so that was September 30th. Ambassador, to you, can President Trump afford, from a credibility standpoint, to allow Hamas to drag the negotiations out without returning the hostages first?
Well, you know, what's interesting here, Leland, is that neither side feels that it can say no to President Trump. So President Trump has built up a position of strength and credibility. You have to give him credit for that. So that neither Hamas nor Israel feels that when he says something that they can tell him no. What they both are trying to do is say yes and then whittle away what yes actually means as they go through the implementation. So what President Trump needs to do and his team need to do is stay focused on implementation. So as we were just talking about with Hamas and the hostages, Hamas promised to release all the hostages. I guarantee you they will not release all of them all at once on one day and say we're done. They're going to release some. It's going to be a trickle. They're going to negotiate. And likewise, Israel, when Prime Minister Netanyahu endorsed Trump's plan, even in that same breath, he said, but we don't think Hamas will actually implement this. And if they do not implement it, we reserve the right to continue to go after Hamas. So this is very, very tenuous right now.
Very tenuous. And I think you both remarkably point out how Trump has gotten both sides to be scared of him. They both feel like they need to say yes to Trump, which is remarkable. But Joel, to that point, you and I have talked on a number of occasions that Trump seems to have this unique power over Netanyahu. For one, during the bombing of Iran, to tell the Israelis, you're done, and turn the planes around, which they did. And Netanyahu turned around fully loaded fighter jets that were ready to bomb Iran. And now, again, with this, telling Israel, we're done in Gaza, at least while we are negotiating.
Yeah.
How does he have that power when any other U.S. president saying that to the Israelis would have been seen as heresy?
Look, and let's add to this. Even the other day, he had Prime Minister Netanyahu apologize to the Qataris for bombing Qatar, and he made Prime Minister Netanyahu do that. He has this power because he has enormous credibility inside of Israel, because he has consistently expressed support for Israel and all of its objectives under Prime Minister Netanyahu, from annexing the Golan Heights to bombing Iran to moving the capital to Jerusalem, you name it. This has been a president who has been supportive in an extreme way. And that's the theory, is that one can be extremely supportive of Israel and then collect when the time comes. And I think he's now seeing a moment to try to collect. He's not going to push Israel over if it doesn't get these hostages out. But if the hostages do come out, I am confident that this president's going to say it's time to move forward now to the next phase and the real implementation of a peace plan.
Now, Ambassador, it strikes me that Donald Trump probably has more currency right now, to continue with the metaphor from Joel, than any American president has ever had in the Middle East. He has more IOUs, and now he's willing to call them in.
Well, I think that's right. But everything that Joel said is correct. I completely agree. But we have to remember a few other instances as well. As when President Trump was telling Netanyahu, don't attack Iran. And then Netanyahu went and did it anyway. And that forced President Trump's hand to then go follow up with his B-2 bomber strikes to take out the nuclear weapons, because we couldn't afford an Iran that was wounded but not defeated. So there is a tension in that relationship there. But I do agree that President Trump has the maximum leverage of any president that we've seen for a long time, and he is trying to use it. And he's trying to use it for what President Trump always talks about. He just wants peace. He believes, as this plan for Gaza demonstrates, if there's peace, if people are not killing each other, you can actually have economic development, people can live better, and then that becomes a vested interest, and people then build things for the future. It's when there's desperation and desolation that people are willing to go to any extreme to fight, and he's trying to end that cycle.
Well, I would say also just because there were so many vested interests, especially with the Iranians, in creating the ferocity of hate inside of Gaza. But, Joel, this strikes me as an interesting inflection point, because I remember sitting, I think you and I were together when Trump talked about owning Gaza. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
And your friends on the left lost their minds over that. It was going to be, are we going to invade? What's going to happen? But I said that night that after 50 years of things not working with American foreign policy in the Middle East with respect to the Palestinians, what do you have to lose by trying something new?
Throw something out there.
Right? If this comes through, is it going to be Democrats who are going to have to eat an awful lot of crow?
I think this would be the kind of crow that we'd be happy to eat, for lack of a better way of describing it. But look, let me step back on this also as well and say that the president, he also talked about moving all the Palestinians out back in March. He's backed off from that too. And he talked about owning it. He's backed off from that too, some management role. So I think he's kind of pulled back a little bit. But in a way, by testing with that, what he did was a little bit.
Well, he also scared everybody enough to say things might happen.
I think it definitely got people's attention. And now we see Tony Blair in the game as well. So there are a lot of new factors.
I remember Tony Blair in the game in 2010, and he still couldn't get it done. So. Oh, boy, what is old is new again. Gentlemen, thank you both very much. We appreciate it. Ambassador Joel, good to see you.